A reading from the Gospel of Mark. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up to a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
There's a popular saying among pilots in the Blue Angels squadron: "I'm just glad to be here." This is their response to a commander's instruction, and it's how they express gratitude for being part of the team. And if you've ever watched a Blue Angels flight demonstration, then you might begin to understand why. Imagine what it must be like to slice through the air with such precision, to dance above the clouds without the cruel fetters of gravity. It must be like touching the hem of glory. So they say, "I'm just glad to be here." But if you're like me and you suffer from acrophobia, that is the fear of heights, this might not sound like a scenario that would elicit your gratitude. I am the guy who gets on the Boeing 747 carrying his own paper bag for those inevitable moments of distress, and who annoys the other passengers for reciting the Lord's Prayer, putting a loud emphasis on the words, "on earth as in heaven, on earth." You know, the ground. And so when I feel the landing gear hit the concrete, I give a deep sigh of relief and I say to myself, "I'm just glad to be here." In today's gospel story, Jesus takes his 3 closest disciples up a mountain where he is transfigured and appears with Elijah and Moses. So Peter, the Barney Fife of the group, makes a rather interesting suggestion. "Let's build some tents for y'all. I'll bring the Snuggies and hot chocolate, and we can order Papa John's and watch Survivor reruns. It'll be great." And can you blame him? The man is excited. "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here." Or channeling his inner Blue Angel, "I'm just glad to be here, Jesus." But in Mark's telling of the story, Peter apparently misses something, which is why Mark emphasizes that Peter did not know what to say. He didn't know what to say, Mark says, because he and the other disciples were terrified. Now let's think for a moment about the disciples' trepidation, because this isn't the only place in this gospel where we find them scared. Jumping ahead to the final scenes in Mark's gospel, the disciples approach the empty tomb and are stricken with fear. It doesn't take long to see that this moment on the Mount of Transfiguration foreshadows and prefigures the resurrection of Jesus. But that's not all. If we move to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is betrayed and handed over to the authorities, Jesus finds his disciples sleeping. And when they awaken, their reaction to seeing Jesus is exactly the same as Peter's reaction when he sees Jesus transfigured on the mountain. In fact, in the original language, the wording is almost identical. It says, "They did not know what to say." You see, terror is how they react when the stone is rolled away, and bewilderment, even to the point of speechlessness, is how they respond to the cup of suffering that their Messiah is about to endure. But in today's passage, we see both reactions at the site of Transfiguration. Peter did not know what to say, Mark says, for the disciples were terrified. And so you have these two emotions, fear and bewilderment. And they represent these two pivotal moments in the gospel, the cross and the resurrection. And here in this passage, they're both mashed together at one site. What does this mean? And what does it tell us about Peter's mistake? In November of 1985, just a day after Thanksgiving, two thieves walked into the University of Arizona Museum of Art and stole a painting by the Dutch expressionist Willem de Kooning. The painting, called Woman Ochre, was the last in a famous series by the artist, and it was worth millions of dollars. Now jump ahead 31 years later, and a man named David Van Auker, the owner of a furniture and antique store in Silver City, New Mexico, was called to a home by a man who was managing his family's estate. As he wandered through the house snapping photos of bedroom sets and pottery, he noticed something hidden behind the door. Upon further inspection, he discovered a beautiful painting on a wrinkled canvas. So, for just $2,000, Van Auker purchased the painting, drove back to Silver City, and placed it on display in his shop's window. The next morning, the very first customer who walked in the door took a look at the painting and suggested that it could be an authentic de Kooning piece. Scoffing at the customer's suggestion, Van Auker dismissed this person until 4 other customers the same day made the same remark. If you look closely enough, they would say, you can even see his signature. Sure enough, as Van Auker bent down toward the painting and scrunched his eyes to see, there it was, in the bottom left-hand corner, a small yet faded signature. Now that was enough to catch his attention. And so he opened his laptop, and after scrolling through several search pages, he came upon a story in the Arizona Republic, and the headline read, "Unsolved Arizona Mystery, de Kooning painting valued at $100 million, missing for 30 years. When he clicked the link, there it was, a picture of the painting that currently resided in his shop window. So in the summer of 2017, just this past summer, Van Auker returned the painting to the Arizona Museum, much to the delight of everyone on campus. I wonder what would have happened had those customers not recognized de Kooning's signature. Does Peter recognize the signature of Jesus? It's a funny thing to imagine Jesus having a signature, but just hold that thought for a moment. Once Peter stops drooling over the possibility of a cosmic sleepover, a cloud overshadows the mountain and a voice thunders forth. "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." But listen to what? Jesus doesn't seem to say anything in this passage. Yet in the previous passage, just prior to ascending the mountain, he tells his disciples that he must undergo great suffering, rejection, and even death. More than that, he tells them that a requirement of discipleship is that they too must take up their cross and follow him. And guess who won't have any of it, even taking Jesus off to the side to rebuke him? If you don't know already, let me give you 2 clues. First, he's not the teacher's pet. And second, his name rhymes with Peter. You see, the point is not to build tents and camp out on the mountaintop. In just a few moments, Jesus will descend the mountain with his disciples into the valley of weakness and pain, just as we are about to descend into the valley of the Lenten season. The marks of transfigured life, the marks of resurrection, are never detached from the pain of Gethsemane. You see, the cross is not just a stage that prepares us for resurrection. The cross is the way of life that is vindicated by the resurrection. Or as one New Testament scholar once put it, the crucifixion is the signature of the risen one. The customers who recognized de Kooning's signature were well-versed in his art. They hung out in art exhibits, they took classes on abstract expressionism, and they read biographies of their favorite painters. In a certain respect, these famous artists became their friends, and we all tend to hang out wherever our friends spend their time. In fact, we spend so much time with them and get to know them so well that eventually we can even authenticate their presence based on their handwriting. So how can we expect to recognize the risen Lord's signature if we don't hang out in the valleys? If, as Howard Thurman once said, Jesus identifies with those who have their backs against the wall, then we will find Jesus' signature etched into those walls. If we hope to become well-versed in the art of following Jesus, we must relearn what it means for something to be beautiful. Because sometimes, and I'm as guilty as anyone, we survey the opulence of a home, the greatness of a nation, the vast power of a military, and the philanthropic efforts of our favorite organizations, and we say, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let's stay." But then when we look at the state penitentiaries or the impoverished neighborhoods or the rundown schools, we say, "It's not good to be here. Let's pack up our tents and head back up to the mountaintop." But isn't that kind of like stealing from an art exhibit? Does Jesus belong to the narratives of triumph and glory, empire and mastery? Does his face rest upon a wrinkled canvas hidden behind a door so that he cannot disrupt the current order of things? Has the mountain of victory superseded the valley of tribulation? No, it hasn't. And in these times, it is important to say so and to say it often. The Transfiguration will not allow us to get away with a faith that does not root us deep into the soil of this world. As soon as we're tempted to plant ourselves on the mountaintop, a cloud overshadows us and a voice thunders forth, "Listen to him." Because there ain't no valley, ain't no mountain high enough. There ain't no valley low enough to keep Jesus from getting to the pain and misery and suffering of this world, not because he leaves the mountaintop behind, but because he brings it down into the valley with him. If the cross is the signature of the risen one, then the valley signs off on the glory of the Lord. If weakness is the way in which God's power is manifest, then the Lamb inscribes the word of the lion. If folly is the mode of God's wisdom, then the jester signs the autograph of the sage. Keep that in mind when Easter rolls around on April Fool's Day this year. There's an interesting conversation taking place today, mostly on blogs and social media, concerning how Christians should engage culture in such a fragmented age. The discussion revolves around a position known as the Benedict option, named after the 6th century monastic order of Saint Benedict. Benedict, who left Rome and headed for the mountains, created a network of contemplative monasteries and inspired generations of monks to seek lives of quiet reflection and prayer. For those who wanted to live a life of traditional virtue, he argued, full participation in mainstream society was no longer possible. What's necessary is to withdraw from society and develop a more densely textured religious life in order to cultivate the virtues that are otherwise eclipsed by the vices of this world. Now, given the current political climate and the debates around class and race, the questions raised by the Benedict option are certainly relevant today. But the debate is all about where to place the accent on modern spirituality. Should we emphasize withdrawal from the world or re-engagement with it? Benedict certainly talked about both, but the question is where to put the emphasis. The side that tends to overemphasize withdrawal thinks that the mountain of retreat and virtue can be cut off from the valley of pain and struggle. So it ventures into a form of triumphalism that channels the anxiety of white middle-class society more so than the hospitality of its namesake, Saint Benedict. For example, in light of the president's recent remarks about people from Haiti, El Salvador, and Africa. A proponent of this position recently posed this question: if word got out that the government was planning to build a housing project for the poor in your neighborhood, how would you feel about it? Be honest with yourself. Nobody would consider this good news. You wouldn't consider it good news because you don't want the destructive culture of the poor imported into your neighborhood. Drive out to the poor part of town and see what and here I'm paraphrasing, toilet bowl it is. Yikes, right? But there's another way of thinking that doesn't take this either-or approach to the mountain and the valley. Patrick Gilger, a Jesuit priest, talks about his time with the poor. He claims that Christian formation is built by living and working with people in poverty, which is why he spent years walking the Cabrini Green housing projects in Chicago, then lived for years with the Lakota Sioux on the Pine Ridge Reservation, where houses were boarded up and wild packs of stray dogs prowled around in the bitter cold. He spent a summer with the Jesuit Refugee Service to aid victims of the Sudanese Civil War, and he remembers the endless sea of United Nations tarps under which thousands of South Sudanese ate and drank and slept. He recalls how out of place he felt, how it took years to learn the meaning of the words, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours are the kingdom of God." In a recent magazine article, he writes this: is the arrival of the poor good news? Yes, it is. It is good news because it is the arrival of Christ. So the extent to which I do not want housing for the poor in my own neighborhood is the extent to which I am failing to be a Christian. The purpose of strategic withdrawal is precisely to prepare for the welcoming of Christ. Art connoisseurs learn the signatures of their favorite artists by spending time in art galleries. Patrick Gilger learned to recognize the signature of the risen Lord by hanging out in the cross-shaped galleries of the valley. He knows that the light on the mountain shines radiantly in the darkness, and that the marks of transfiguration are hidden and revealed in the rough places. When we learn to see that way, then and only then will we be able to look at those rough places and say, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here." Amen.